It's a funny business. Ask Bob Monkhouse.
When Dennis Goodwin and I were really at our peak of turning out material and performing, we hired a girl called Jill Porofsky. She was a student, and a magazine called TV Mirror wanted to know how many jokes we had written. So we gave her a typical week's output from that year, a typical week's output from the previous year, and a typical week's output from the year before that, and said, count the jokes. Well, the poor girl went potty, because it took her 6 months to work it out. And I didn't meet her again till 1968, when I happened to be in the Caribbean at a place called the Lacan Beach Hotel, and a girl came up to me and said, do you remember me? And I said, Jill Porofsky. I said, what are you doing these days? She said, I write speeches for Ronald Reagan. I often wondered whether Ronald Reagan knows he's using Monkhouse Goodwin jokes.
I'm delighted to welcome Bob Monkhouse to It's a Funny Business. He's one of those very few performers who can stand with one foot on the polished cabaret floor and the other firmly placed on the music hall footlights. He really does seem to belong to both eras. So sit back and relax and enjoy the next half hour as Bob Monkhouse hopefully proves it's a funny business.
My first auditions, I failed them all. I auditioned for Carol Levis. He took me on one side of the Golders Green Hippodrome, I was 17, and said, don't ever walk on a stage again, son. Never, ever, please. The next one I did was at the Windmill, and Vivian Van Dam said, thank you, after I'd said 3 lines. The 3 lines, I can remember them well. I said, hello, I've got good news for you. Prices are coming down on a big scale, so if you want to buy a big scale, now's the time to do it. My girlfriend, I wouldn't say she's ugly, but that's just about where he said, thank you, I'll let you know. No, I never worked at the Windmill. Oh, I wanted to. Oh, don't you know that I wanted to. Dennis Goodwin and another friend called John Carter and I used to go up. We were devils. On football afternoon or Wednesday from Dulwich, we would say that we were going out to draw leaves. We're going out to draw nature, sir. Because we were part of the limping art class that couldn't play cricket, you see. And no, we'd go straight down to West Dulwich Station, nip on that train, straight up to Charing Cross, run like mad over to the Windmill. Meantime, tucking our school caps away and putting on very deep voices and producing pipes. The 3 of us all had pipes. None of us smoked, but we used to suck the pipes and as if they were full of dottle and say, oh, no, you pay. Oh, boy, you pay, because I paid for the gin and tonics earlier. Things like that. Just to catch whatever fleeting glimpse of female flesh you were allowed to just a fraction of a second in which the fan was flashed away and there was part of actual skin bathed in such a brilliant purple from the side that it looks as if it had been dyed. In fact, I really believed that ladies had, I'm sure, either deep black or bright green nipples. Because there was nothing else you could buy or look at except Health and Efficiency, and if you believed Health and Efficiency magazine, you believed all women were built like Woolworth's dolls. I really wanted to do radio more than any other form of entertainment. I'd grown up with radio. That was my world. That little radio set in my bedroom when I was a kid with Bandwagon on it.
Yeah.
Throughout the war with Hoopla, with Max Wall just after the war.
Yes.
Wonderful entertainers.
Waterlock Spa, I suppose.
I adored Eric Barker.
Yeah.
I particularly loved Just Fancy,
Yes.
that programme he did with Derek Geiler.
Indeed, yes. The 2 old men on the bench.
The Old Men on the Bench, yes. It's seeing the other fellow's point of view. Oh, glory. Wonderful characters, and they were all real, and you could use your mind, your imagination would be stimulated by radio. Oh, you could go to the pictures, certainly, and see Abbott and Costello, and of course the Ealing comedies were quite wonderful, doing things that radio couldn't do. But they couldn't do the things that radio could do.
No.
So radio is what I wanted to do. So I then took a BBC audition. An agent called Philip Brown saw me in a show called the Spotlight Review at the 20th Century Theatre, Notting Hill Gate. And quite a few hopefuls were in that show, including me. So I'm out there doing a dreadful act called Architecture Will Lecture. And there I am on stage trying to look like a comic, and I've got an American tie on, which had a very broad base, almost like the kipper ties of more recent times.
Yes.
I'm wearing a herringbone American suit, and I'm wearing the absolute quintessential piece of equipment, the trilby, with the front turned up. Now, all comedians had to have a hat, because it was essential for several reasons. First of all, if it was a bowler hat, you were immediately associated with the comedy of Laurel and Hardy during the 30s. Therefore, you were a funny man, you had a bowler hat on, and you would use that for various purposes, particularly for raising. Dick Henderson Sr., Dickie Henderson's father,
Tiptoe through the tulips.
Tiptoes, emptied, all the contents on me. Right, that one. He would always raise his hat when he wanted a round of applause. In other words, I've just done something clever. He's just done the routine, which involved a lot of the names of trees and things, for example. You know, I called the branch line, I dialed tree, and I got through and made an ash of myself. Raise the hat. Right? Chord in A. And I'm not to know that in the audience is Philip Brown, and he must have seen something in my eagerness. Anyway, he fixed me a BBC audition. For years and years and years and years, the same man had been doing BBC light entertainment auditions. I gather he was an elderly man, of a rather sour disposition, and so he was regarded as ideal casting for this task. There was a little light came on after 10 minutes which said stop, and that was the end of your audition. And you went out, and a woman outside gave you £0.50, which was travel and subsistence. And also you got a biscuit and a glass of water. BBC water, of course, the famous water with a film of dust. So along I went for my audition. Well, now, results were immediate. Within 3 weeks, I was booked on 8 radio shows. It had never happened before in the history of the BBC. People had always waited 6 months, 12 months. Cicely Courtnidge told me she waited 5 years after her audition for the BBC before she got a broadcast. And she knows that out of the 10 marks normally given, she'd only been given 5 by the auditioner. I didn't know that I'd got 10 out of 10. Inexplicable? The man who'd been giving auditions for the BBC for all those years had been taken ill the previous day. They looked at the new intake of staff and found they had a young producer who'd come from Cologne, who had been running forces broadcasting for the army in Germany. So they said to him, "You'll have to do our auditions for a few weeks." I learned later that he heard me, and he gave me 10 out of 10 and wrote "wow" after my name, and is now pretty well known as Dennis Main Wilson, the most consistently successful light entertainment producer that BBC has. Well, dear Dennis Main Wilson was the reason that I'm in show business, because if I'd failed that audition, I would never have gone on. I'm sure of it. I wanted to do radio, and there I was doing radio. I was on everything. I was the resident comedian on Showtime, topping the bill over all kinds of fumbling newcomers who've long since disappeared into the morass of no talents, like Harry Seacombe, Max Bygraves, Peter Sellers, Anthony Newley. And, of course, I've still got all those broadcasts, because I was so excited to have myself on the air that I had an outfit called Guy de Beer, don't know whatever happened to them, making records, which have to be played back with fibre needles so they won't rip up the disc. Well, of course, since then I've transferred it all to tape, and I have it all for my grandchildren, if I ever have any, to listen to and say, "Oh, Grandpa, weren't you dreadful?"
Thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's very, very wonderful to be appearing again on Variety Fanfare in Manchester. I was walking up Ardwick Green singing, "Give me a home where the buffalo roam and the deer and the antelope play." Before I knew it, an estate agent had sold me a furnished cage in Bellevue. Not that I really need a place. I'm staying at a lovely hotel in Hume, the Ritz Doss House. It's rather old, but... No, it is rather old. I wouldn't say the walls were shaky, but it's the first time I've seen Death Watch Beatles with parachutes. The only trouble is I have got a lovely room. It really is beautiful, except when the lift comes down, but the only trouble is it's rather small. It's a rather small room. In fact, to give you an idea how small it is, my dressing table, it hasn't got drawers. It's got panties.
You may have wondered why I haven't already got to the story of my partnership over the years, 12 years in all, with Dennis Goodwin. Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose because it's not until this point in the story that Dennis came in, although he was at Dulwich College with me. But he was a year younger than me, and, you know, the gulf of a year when you're at school is uncrossable. And he loved radio as much, no, even more than I did, so much so that he had become a radio salesman at Gamage's, the big department store. so he could be near the thing that he loved best.
Incredible.
Oh, he loved them, and he loved the people who used to come into Gamages, a dear old lady who said, "Does this get all the London theatres?" and things like that. He loved it. He loved radio, and he hated television. He hated it with a cordial loathing, which, when ITV started in 1955, he wouldn't even watch, although we appeared on it together. Dennis was not a natural physical performer. He had bad coordination. If you threw something to Dennis Goodwin to catch, his arms would spread rather than come together to catch it. It was the most extraordinary thing. So radio was a perfect medium for his gentle timing and his rather whimsical turn of wit.
And then True Romance came into my life. What a girl. You've heard of Lorna Doone. This was her sister, Nothing Doone. I still remember how she looked that day. She was wearing a very large hairnet. From the back, it looked as if she was fishing for bloaters. From the front, it looked as if she'd caught one. But she was an extraordinary girl. Terribly nosy, you know. She was so nosy. Every time she blinked, she said, "What's happened?" I did the best I could with that. One night, she took me back to her flat, and we sat on the couch. And right away, I could tell she was a real oomph girl. As she sat down, the sofa went oomph. And what passion she had. She grabbed me by the throat. She said, "I want what I want when I want it." I said, "Really? Well, you get what I've got when I've got it." Then she sort of snuggled up close, and I thought we were getting on awfully well. She put her arms round me and everything, and then she suddenly reached up and turned off the light. So I went home. I can take a hint.
So I'm in the RAF at Kelvin House at the Central Medical Establishment when somebody says there's a man downstairs called Dennis Goodwin who wants to see you. He was at school with you. I go down in my corporal's uniform and find this very nervous young man standing at the door saying, "Do you remember me?" "No." "I heard you on Sunday on Variety Bandbox." "Oh, yes." So you know all about broadcasting?" "Yes, of course I knew all about broadcasting. I was 18, wasn't I? And I'd been on 15 times. "Well, I'd like to talk to you about writing." Now, at this point, I was really running low on material. So there I was, running out of material, and there was Dennis saying, "I want to co-write with you." So we sat down and we wrote a script together. Well, we really did. We sat down and wrote a script for Derek Roy because I was already selling material to Derek. Derek was wonderful. He was so encouraging to both of us, and he always immediately paid us on the spot. We wrote our next show for Bonacolino, Paul Carpenter, called It's a Great Life, and we were off to the races. And we are spending, Mike, you're not going to believe this, but I looked at clippings and I've listened to recordings. We are spending 20 hours of every day writing comedy or performing it. Now, it sounds ridiculous, but we're getting 4 hours sleep, and we don't seem to need any more. So in 1 week, in one sample week, Dennis and I would have written a half-hour comedy show called Hello Playmate, starring Arthur Askey, David Nixon, Diana Decker, and various guest stars. The Show Band Show, which went out on the Monday, which was an hour show with loads of continuity for me and Ricky Fulton. We were the co-hosts of it. On a Tuesday, we'd put together a show which was for Dennis and myself, called Leave It to the Boys, where we just did all the comedy ourselves and performed all this very, very fast patter, using the jokes that nobody else would use. Then on a Wednesday, it was called Mixed Doubles, and it starred Cyril Fletcher, Betty Estelle, Michael Dennison, and Dulcie Gray in a situation comedy with Maurice Denham, and that was a sitcom about neighbours who hated one another but pretended to like one another, and that kept us going. That used to take us a whole day to write that one. That was tough writing. That came slow. And then on the Thursday, we had started my television show called Fast and Loose, besides which we were writing a television series for Michael Howard, which was fortnightly, and submitting material for various other shows. So we had all that going. Plus, at the same time, we had the Saturday show, which meant all the linking for the show band show on a Saturday. We had a little programme which was going out on Radio Luxembourg called Smash Hits, and we were writing single acts for various people and for ourselves. And the double act that we did, Dennis and I used to do a double act where we decided that what we would do, we would take the jokes, pare them down to their irreducible minimum, and just rattle them off, hardly giving the audience time to laugh. And, oh, I can't tell you how much fun we had doing it. We used to crack one another up. We had such tremendous joy. I look back on those days with pleasure. I don't know what the act sounded like, but if it gave as much pleasure as we got out of it, something weird must have been happening.
As far as women are concerned,
A fella's either got it,
or he hasn't got it.
Now, we've got it.
But even if you had it,
You couldn't use it.
Or maybe you used to have it.
And you lost it.
And even if you need
You
it.
wouldn't know what to do with it.
If you had it.
And you've had it.
So forget it.
And now here is a Spot announcement. Thank you, Spot. Now
To the Monkhouse Goodwin Radio Corner. First, here is a brief message for all babies under 3 months of age.
Damp, isn't it?
Next, report on crime.
From the secret files of Scotland Yard, we bring you the compelling case of a man walking home down a dark alley when suddenly a sinister figure thrust a gun in his ribs.
Stick 'em down.
You mean stick him up?
I do. No wonder I've been losing money.
Next, life in 2 scenes.
First scene, a boy and a girl at the age of 2 years.
I want to play with a dolly.
I want to play with a soldier.
20 years later.
I want to play with a dolly.
I want to play with a soldier.
Laurel and Hardy, Stan and Ollie, Stanley and Babe, those 2 wonderful gentlemen. Do you know, there was a programme done by Robert Vass on television, and it was one of the few times I've ever been quoted in the Sunday Times. Elkin Allen found something of mine worthwhile repeating. He said, Bob Monkhouse put it most succinctly when he said their magic was that they were not 2 grown-ups pretending to be children, but they were actually 2 children pretending to be grown-ups.
Beautiful.
I think it was a nice observation.
Yes, it is.
And I'm quite pleased with it. Which is the reason I'm telling you about it. They first came to Britain in 1932. I was only 4, so I couldn't see them. But they did a tour here in 1947, which is when I first saw them, and I went to the Finsbury Park Empire. I didn't get to meet them that time, but in 1953, when they came back and toured again for Bernard Delfont, I saw them at the Lewisham Hippodrome. And of course, the main thing was that they would just stand there and be loved. And we all went potty for them because there was Stan doing his famous cry and fluffing his hair up into that weird, like, standing up like a wheat field in a storm, and there's lovely fat Ollie, who was enormously rotund, roly-poly and twinkly, fluttering his tie at us with his fingers and wagging his head and making little finger gestures of great finesse and picking invisible pieces of lint off Stan and flicking them into the space.
You must have been terribly excited to see them.
Oh,
in the flesh, doing that, you know.
I couldn't believe it. I kept on having to say to myself, you're here, they're there, you're looking at them, that's them. It's not the front page of Film Fun you're looking at, son, it's them. And then to go back and meet them and to talk with them, oh, the old world courtesy was unbelievable. I think it's true that the very great stars are usually very great people in the way they receive and treat other human beings. They have learned that they don't have to push. They have learned that if courtesy has to be extended to them, they should return it. And I don't think I ever met a gentleman as sweet as Babe Hardy, and I never met a gentle man like Stan Laurel. He seemed like a man who had been almost defeated by life, by the vicissitudes of a personal discipline that made him marry all his girlfriends instead of just live with them a while and move on.
Can you remember what you actually said to them, Bob, when you met them, you know?
Oh, yes, I can remember every single second. I can remember so clearly actually being shown into the dressing room where Stan was sitting. Babe wasn't there. He was sitting with the naked lamps of the dressing room, somehow burning out all the colour from his face. He had makeup on, which Babe didn't. I noticed later Babe had no makeup at all, but then his own personal colouring was very high. But Stan had the same makeup that he must have put on his face when he was one of Fred Karno's Mummingbirds. Yes. It was the old-fashioned makeup, the rouged top of the cheek, the red dot at the corner of the eye, the white line around the inside rim of the eyelid. And I can remember saying, how do you do, sir, to him, because I thought I'd seen a lot of American films and young people always called older people sir in them. And he had Laurel and Hardy cufflinks on that someone had made for him, and he wanted to show those to me. He was so pleased with them. Some metalworker had made them. I remember how thrilled he was.
And what you'd have given for those?
Oh, I would have given anything for them. If you look around this house, Mike, you'll find so much Laurel and Hardy material.
Absolutely.
There's pieces of soap shaped like Laurel and Hardy. There's everything I can find that's souvenirs of those wonderful men. But the thing I think that stands out most clearly in my mind was that having been sitting there talking for half an hour to Stan Laurel, who was most generous with his time, and that must be the most difficult thing to be generous with in the world.
Yes.
Having been sitting there for half an hour talking to him between houses, Babe Hardy came into the dressing room, and Stan Laurel stood up. He stood up for his partner coming into the room. It was just a quiet, unassuming mark of respect between two men. I saw them subsequently at the Birmingham Hippodrome, and the same thing happened there, and I saw them 3 times at the Alhambra Bradford on a special trip I made during their tour to see them. And the same thing happened again. They had absolute respect for each other, and I never saw a double act as good as theirs, so I think that must have been something to do with it.
In the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, on the trail of the lonesome pine, in the pale moonshine, our hearts entwine, where she carved her name and I carved mine. Oh June, just like the mountains are blue, like the pine, I am lonesome for you. In the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, on the trail of the lonesome pine.
Whatever business you go into, whatever profession you choose, you're bound to be attracted towards certain aspects of it. Whatever you originally thought you were going to love, it may not necessarily be what you wind up doing.
Yeah.
You can start off in the public works, and you're drawn towards sewers. So, in my particular case, I have been drawn inexorably and quite inevitably towards clubland, and I found that I'm probably at my optimum level as a performer at midnight talking to drunks. It's funny, but I still use the techniques, of course, that I developed in my years with Dennis Goodwin, of packing as many jokes as possible into the time that I'm on the stage.
Yes.
I still believe in overkill, providing you time it correctly and space it nicely. I like its effect. Oh, believe me, I have immense respect for performers who can use space.
Oh, yes.
Jack Benny, I suppose, was probably the greatest American exponent of the use of space. Laurel and Hardy were masters of the pause, that glance at camera by Babe Hardy.
It's a repose, isn't it, that they develop?
That's the word, it's repose.
It's repose.
Bygraves has it. Des O'Connor can impose that on an audience with immense stillness and charm, and the audience will stay with him for as long as he wants to make them wait.
That's right.
It's a wonderful quality.
But it's not you.
But it's not me
No,
any
no.
more than it's Bruce Forsyth or... Bruce uses very little space. Bruce packs every moment with an attitude, a change, a quick look.
Yeah.
Although Bruce may not keep talking all the time, he has got 100 billiard balls in the air
That's
that he's
right.
juggling.
Yeah.
Me, I'm a lapel grabber. I'm a carnival huckster. I'm the chap who goes out and says, now listen to what I'm going to tell you. I'm far more in the tradition, I suppose, of a transatlantic Max Miller. So why do I love going on at midnight in a club called the El Puerto del Sol and Macambo Working Men's Club Social Hinkley? I don't know. I remember at a club called La Bamba in Darlington going out in a very smart new suit. Oh, it was a beautiful suit. It was made by the best tailor in London. It cost 150 quid, and I'm talking about 1967. That's a long time ago to spend 150 quid on a suit, but oh, it was superb. I had just said, thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening, as my play-on music was fading, when a man who obviously loved me came staggering across the floor, rubber-legged, and I beamed upon him, because I knew I was going to get some good drunk gags out, right to start off the act in a good mood. And the man said, hello? And you know, I still couldn't get cross or do anything except behave like a well-trained circus horse. I stood there in this terrible mess and said, I'm sorry you brought that up. Oh, isn't that pathetic?
Till somebody loves you, you're nobody. Till somebody cares.
My fondest memory of childhood, which looking back on it was not all that full of fond memories, was not just going to the News Theatre on the off chance of seeing Laurel and Hardy or a silly symphony. It was not just the fact that I could go to our local flea pit, the King's Hall down in Penge, and see Ernie Lossinger in a film. It was one Christmas, just one Christmas. I suppose I was 7, or say even tinier. I had the world's best granddad. He was my father's father. He was round, he was ruby-cheeked, he was benevolent. He had white eyebrows and his eyes were bright blue and they twinkled. He looked like Santa Claus, except he didn't have a beard. He was completely bald and his head shone as if it had been polished. And he had half-crowns in every pocket. And That Christmas we went to his home. He'd invented custard, you know, Monk and Glass custard. Monkhouse and Glasscock was the name of the company, and that was my granddad. And so he was quite wealthy. And we went to his lovely home, which was called Terrington in Dulwich, and we spent 2 days there. He had a wonderful set of upstairs, downstairs types. All the servants, as they were lovely people. There was a butler, and there was a boots, and there was a lovely cook, just like Mrs. Bridges, and the steam coming out, and the great goose being carried out onto the table. Everywhere there were crackers and decorations, and me clambering all over Grandad. And on Boxing Day afternoon, he took us to see the panto, and we went to the Lyceum, and it was the first time I'd ever seen Clarkson Rose. And he came out onto the stage as Widow Twankey, and I laughed so much. I was sick in the interval, and I didn't care, and my granddad didn't care, and he bought me more to eat, and we had more ice cream, and we had more to drink, and we had these great big boxes of chocolates he kept producing from bottomless pockets, and laughing at me laughing, and everybody had such a marvellous time. And I can remember going to bed that night on that great soft linen that they had in those days, whatever happened to that, and real down pillows, thinking this is the best time of my entire life. And that marvellous golden Christmas has remained a wonderful memory, a warm glow within me ever since, despite, Mike, in 1954, my meeting with the very man who was really responsible for the wonder of it, the great Clarkson Rose. He was appearing in Belfast, at the Opera House there, and I was on the same bill. And I said to him, Clarky, I must tell you, the very first pantomime I ever saw was, I think, 1935, at the Lyceum, on a Boxing Day afternoon. And I wondered if you remembered doing it. And he said, "Yes, I remember that. Oh, I remember that show. I remember that theatre. What a terrible experience. What a horrible day. Oh, really dreadful. I had a filthy cold. The manager was impossible, you know, absolutely impossible. None of the props worked. The audience was dreadful, noisy, those kids." And I thought to myself, he saw me, and I never let on. I never told him. But as the years have gone by, I realised how he must have felt, because it's happened to me. And it does make you think. It is a funny business.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to that as much as I did. Thank you, Bob, for being my guest, and thank you at home for listening. Join me again the same time next week. Until then, Mike Craig saying goodbye.